Good morning. Welcome. Thank you for inviting me to Milwaukee to speak on Christmas with a non-Christmas collector. My name is Richard. I am not a Christmas collector. I feel like I'm in front of an AA meeting. But as I've gone on in life, I've found a lot of things about Christmas that intersect with what I do collect. So I'll start and I'll be talking about postal history and then other intersecting collections that I have. The question's been asked several times of me this weekend, oh, and what do you collect? And I always have to hesitate because it's a list of about 50 things. But it's always fun. So first, who am I? My name is Richard Martorelli from the Philadelphia area. I'm definitely a happy man, a lucky husband. My wife Joanne is here with me in the audience. I am the dad of 3. I've been collecting for 50 years, and I'm an accountant that pays for all the other things that I do. When I started collecting, I actually first got interested in map stamps, and the 1898 Christmas issue from Canada was always a wonderful thing. It's a beautiful stamp. If you've seen it, sometimes the ocean is a grayish, sometimes it's a bright blue. And this was issued in 1898 in December to commemorate the inauguration of the British Empire penny post scheme. And at that point, 1 pence sterling equaled 2 cents Canadian, so that's why it's a 2-cent stamp. And the story goes when the Postmaster General for Canada approached the Queen Victoria to say we're going to issue this stamp, he said, oh, and we're going to issue it on the Prince's birthday. And he was thinking the Prince of Wales. The Queen rather frostily replied, which prince? At which point the man thought on his feet and said, well, the Prince of Peace, Your Majesty. And so the stamp was issued closer to the end of December, and that's why it has the Christmas 1898 legend. I had said, again, the blue copy is the other color printing. One of the things that you'll often find on this is what they call oxidation. It's really sulfurization. There's minute quantities of sulfur in the air, and it reacts with the colored metallic ink in the stamp and produces, as you see on the right, what they call the muddy waters variety. So again, you can collect this in many different ways. You can see, you can see in the area here, sometimes the red shifted, so then you can get into lots of political discussions over what the British Empire really owned at that point. Again, fun. Another one that's come up as an early Christmas stamp is this 1951 issue from Cuba. And in a discussion a couple of years ago with members of the Cuban Philatelic Society, they upbraided me because I called it a semi-postal. And they said, no, it was a regularly issued stamp. Even though 25% of the income from the sale of the stamp went to a state charity, it's officially listed as a regular postal emission. I collect, quote, postal history, and there's multiple definitions, and the one on the screen you can read. Basically, I like the envelopes, the covers, the postcards, to see how they went through the mail, why they went through the mail, what the postage was, where it came from, what the routes were. The other area that you're familiar with is topical collecting. I collect some stamps because I like what's on the stamp. So everything you'll see is one of those two as we go along. From a postal history point of view, the United States has a number of firsts that are Christmas stamp related. Clearly the first is the first U.S. Christmas stamp. 1962 was issued. John F. Kennedy was president. There was a lot of political furor. Oh my gosh, the Pope is telling the president what to do. Those GD Catholics. Okay, well, it wasn't really, but a lot of people got upset. And it was, oh, okay, yeah, remember when President Eisenhower made the U.S. motto, "In God We Trust"? There we go again. So you had the atheists and the Protestants and everybody else getting up in arms about what was on the U.S. stamps. 1963 Christmas stamp was the first luminescent tagged Christmas stamp. It was also the last stamp issued under President Kennedy. He was assassinated, as you all know, 3 weeks later. The idea on putting luminescence in stamps was to save the labor of having a postal employee have to, what they called sort all the envelopes in the same direction, so the stamp was always in the upper right-hand corner. So it would go through and get canceled in the canceling machine. What they did with the fluorescent tagging was put in a luminescent marker in the ink that could be read by the machine in any position, any of the four corners. So you didn't have to spend the time to orient the envelope. You just put it into the machine figured out where the stamp was and canceled it. This first Christmas stamp with luminescent tagging was issued in Dayton, Ohio. And that's where the Post Office Department put their equipment to recognize the luminescent tagging. And they had the theory that since 20% of the mail passed through Dayton, then they would tag 20% of the stamps to see if they could get a reasonable test. They started off with doing the tagging in red on airmail and green on regular stamps. 1964 was the first United States se-tenant stamp. Other miniature sheets had been issued, other sheets had been issued, but no time prior to this in the United States had they issued multiple designs in one stamp sheet, one printing pass, if you will. And that was the 1964 Holly stamps. Again, an envelope I got because I like the map stamp, but again, it's the first day for those stamps. 1965 was the first overtly religious U.S. stamp. It's picturing a wind vane, a weather vane, that has the angel Gabriel. A lot of people got upset because it was an angel, which is in multiple religions, so it wasn't one religion. A lot of people got upset and they said, look at that busty woman. And people scratched their heads and said, wait, that's the angel Gabriel. It's not a, well, again, if you want to pick apart something, you'll pick it apart. 1966 was the really, if you will, first absolute religious because it pictured a Madonna and child. But now what had been previously a quiet recognition of Christmas was now more public. In this 1963 first day cover, you can look at that cachet and you can say, is that a window frame or is that a cross? Well, you could take it either way, depending on how you wanted to, but now with a Madonna and child or an angel on the stamp, it was, we're recognizing the religious side of Christmas. 1968 continued with a religious stamp. It was also in 1968 that the U.S. Post Office Department and the Bureau of Engraving and Printing got the Huck pressed, which meant that they could print multiple colors. They could do a better job of reproducing the stamps. But what it did was it had sort of floating plate numbers. And it had multiple plate numbers. So if you were a plate block collector, you went from 4, maybe 6 stamps in the block to a minimum of 20. And if you were a match plate block collector, you had to do hundreds of stamps. And so this was one of the beginnings of the demise for plate block collecting because it just became unaffordable. 1969, you had the first example for the U.S. of town-specific pre-cancels on a non-definitive stamp. Used to, you would see it on the Liberty series, you'd see it on the Washington Heads, you'd see it on all the regular definitive stamps, but never on a commemorative stamp. And the idea here was to test if we pre-canceled these stamps, then our postal workers will see that they are pre-canceled and won't have to cancel them. So we'll save time and labor. So they did a test with these 4 cities, and the intention was to measure the progress and how much was done. Yeah, maybe I do collect Christmas sometimes. This is unofficial first days for the 4 stamps from the 4 named cities. Again, not often found Not extremely expensive, but just not often found, like a lot of things. The intention was to demonetize the stamps after Christmas in 1969, no longer make them available for use. I don't know why, but Postmaster Blunt changed his mind. By January, the stamps were available for postage, and I know I continue to get them in different mailings from dealers or other places, and I bet you we could find sheets out in the exhibition area. This idea had been tried before. In the early 1900s in England, they had a scheme in certain areas where they would collect the mail from the surrounding towns in the area from the 15th to the 22nd. This way they could have everything in the post office, they could begin canceling them, they could have them sorted and organized and all ready for delivery on Christmas Day. Hence the title, posted in advance for delivery on Christmas Day in the actual postmark itself. This way the carriers in the local post offices did not have to work from midnight to noon or whatever on Christmas Day. They could come in early in the morning, but everything was organized and postmarked and ready to be delivered. So it was a much quicker delivery and much easier for them on that day. 1970, the Post Office Department said, we're not sure that we really got good information because the test in 1969 was on a small scale. So we're going to do it nationally this time. And they used a bar printing on both the toy stamps and on the religious stamp. The Christmas Nativity stamp had two printings that you can tell apart just by looking at them. The key areas are the color of the robe of Mary and the contents of the sky. In one it looks like it's snowing, in the other ones it's a much clearer, bluer sky. So they said, great, we'll do this nationwide, we'll sell both stamps at every post office. They went through the test. They weren't sure what the results really told them. The pre-canceling on the stamps, those black bars were almost blending into the design, particularly as you can see on the Nativity stamp. So there were a lot of stamps that were machine canceled. And even though they again tried to demonetize them and say you can't, say that you can't use them anymore, they changed their mind again within the month. And so by January of 1971, these stamps were used and again continue to remain effective. A little bit later on, the late 80s to early 90s, Canada tried a similar experiment to make the mail go faster. They sold stamps that had a barcode on them, there to the left of the design, and envelopes that specifically had spaces for putting in the postal code characters that again were able to be read by an optical scanner. And the example here on the bottom left, you see where it almost looks like the standardized test where you filled in the little circles, which were graded the same way. They went through an optical scanner to read what the results were. The Canadian Post Office was different than the United States in that they actually sold these stamps for 2 or 3 cents less than the face value of postage for that point in time. 1974, we had the first U.S. self-adhesive stamp. Thing that we see now every day, every place, we tried in 1974. They didn't have very good chemists on staff at that point. So as you can see here, the stamps were white in the background, but over time they've faded. The gum has bled through from the back into the stamp. The gum often falls off. It's hard to find them on the original backing material. If you try and use them now, they'll fall off your envelope. The stamp itself was supposedly non-reusable because here in the wings there's a T slit, top to bottom, left to right, that if you pulled the stamp off an envelope because it didn't have a cancellation on it and tried to use it again, the stamp would tear itself and not be reusable. That's what they believed. In order to test that the printing equipment could work, they did a dummy stamp. And again, you can see the slit in the dummy stamp. Again, it's on that same paper, the same gum, just to make sure that all the postal equipment would work in canceling them, in printing them, in using them. They also did dummy stamps for the 1964 se-tenant holly leaves, and those two examples of dummy stamps are so rare, you can't even find a picture of them. They only printed one sheet of each of 100. They printed considerably more, not that many more, a few thousand of the 1974 tests, but the 1964 tests are extremely rare. 1975, we had the first U.S. non-denominated stamp. What happened was that the post office, in this case now the Postal Service, having changed, the Postal Service wanted to have a rate increase. First class postage was 10 cents. They wanted to raise it to 13 cents. In September, therefore, of 1975, they filed their application with the Postal Rate Commission. So it was under consideration. But as you all know, U.S. Christmas stamps continue to be issued in the first half of October in order to let everybody prepare for the season, the mailings. So the post office thought, oh, rats. If we get a rate increase, either we're going to have to print a bazillion 13-cent stamps, or we're going to have to print a bazillion 3-cent stamps for everybody to use as makeup. It'll be chaos. I got it. We won't tell anybody what the denomination is. We'll sell it at the post office for whatever we say it's worth. And if it's still 10 cents, we'll sell it for 10 cents. If the rate is increased, we'll sell it for 13 cents. So that's how they got around it. The rate increase did not come until December 31st, which was good for the post office. But this was essentially the forerunners of the, what I call the alphabet stamps that were issued in 1978 from A through H. And the reason they didn't issue an I stamp for the next change was because then everybody would talk about being irate. So they just let it go. Usages of these non-denominated stamps are, for me, fun to find. The top example is a cover that was sent to Canada that was returned because of one of the 19 different strikes, walkouts, lockouts that the Canadian Postal Service had in a 20, 30-year period. The bottom is where the value of the stamp at 10 cents, to which it remains this day, is recognized, but since the first class value was 13 cents, it was assessed 3 cents postage due. I don't know if you can see the postmark. It's from January of 1976. So that's in my postage due collection is why it's here. 1980 was the first U.S. Christmas stamp to read Season's Greetings. It was in 1981 that there was a case by the name of Lynch versus Donnelly where somebody challenged a city government for putting up a nativity scene in their public Christmas display. And this eventually wound up in the Supreme Court in 1984. And what the Supreme Court said is this did not violate the wall between church and state. And as they say, particularly, there was a secular purpose and it has not impermissibly advanced religion or created an excessive entanglement between religion and government. And that's still the final ruling on this matter. 1982, the U.S. issued the first commemorative Christmas postcard stamp. Now, it doesn't say Christmas on it, but when you read the background material, the post office says, oh, people said they wanted to mail holiday postcards. And so they petitioned that there be a postcard rate stamp. But we didn't want to limit it just to Christmas, so we didn't put Christmas on it. You can use this all year round. Puppy and Kitten in the Snow, used, and I do have other examples used over the next year or two while the rate remained at 13 cents. The U.S. had previously issued 5 other commemorative postcard stamps. Right after the transition from the Post Office Department to the Postal Service, people got innovative, or tried to be, and they issued sets of stamps that had multiple denominations. the way you see Great Britain doing almost continually now. What's for overseas, what's for airmail. So in 1972, it was the National Park Centennial. There were 5 values. One of them was a postcard rate. The Olympics, progress in electronics in 1973, contributors to the revolutionary cause in 1975, and then the Olympic stamps in 1979 for the 1980 Olympics. All had a postcard rate commemorative stamp, as well as first class, airmail, and overseas postcard rates. 1986 was the first U.S. Christmas stamp that said just greetings. Wasn't even season's greetings anymore, it was just greetings. 1993, you had the first Christmas ATM pin. The automatic teller machine had changed how people got cash, how they did banking interactions. You could do deposits at any time, you could get cash out, you could do all sorts of things. They made up panes of stamps on a sort of plasticky type material, and this pane of stamps is the exact size of a piece of currency, so that it could be dispensed by the ATM just as easily as a dollar bill or a $20 bill. The machines still vend these APM stamps. The last one that I know of was in 2017, that stamps were issued. It was one of the US flag issues, specifically for this method of distribution. 1995, you had the first Christmas stamps with no description. So we went from Christmas to season's greetings to nothing. Clearly, it's a stamp with Santa Claus on it, and an angel, and kids playing in the snow, and a Madonna and child, but it doesn't say Christmas anywhere on there. 2010, slight variation on that theme, you had the forever stamps. The 2010 Pine Cones Christmas stamp was the first commemorative forever stamp. Happened to be the first Christmas commemorative stamp. The only stamp previous to this that was a forever stamp was the Liberty Bell. And as you all know, the difference between these stamps and the stamps I talked about before, 1975 or other times, those earlier stamps were always valued at the value sold over the post office counter when they were sold. So the 1975 is always 10 cents, the A stamp is always 18 cents. That will never change. If you bought these stamps in 2010 and used them today in 2019, they would still carry the first class letter value, which is now 55 cents versus I think it was 42 in 2010. Don't quote me on that, but it was considerably less than the 55. 2012, the post office issued their mail kiosks. You may have seen these in your own post office. They've issued different stock. You can print whatever denomination you need on the stamp. The post office has the right to not install the special stamp stock if they choose not to. So in my area in Philadelphia, they chose not to, so I don't have an example of the 2018 stamp. I have it for all the ones from 2012 through 2017. 2013, we had the first round Christmas stamp. Well, it doesn't say Christmas, and it doesn't say airmail, which it did carry the airmail rate, but it does have a Christmas wreath, and it was issued in December. So is that a Christmas stamp? I'm counting it as such. 2014 was the first commercial Christmas stamps. We had seen previous issues of The Simpsons in 2009 and other current culture issues, but this was the first time it appeared on Christmas. And last year in 2018, we had the first product placement Christmas stamp. We had seen the love stamp with the Hershey Kisses on it before, but it didn't say Hershey anywhere. We'd seen the love stamps with the conversation hearts that say I love you, but it didn't say Necco on it anywhere. Here, clearly, this is a bottle of Coca-Cola. You can read Coca-Cola right there. It's like a BMW in a Tom Cruise movie or anything else. It's a product placement. So that's the first, from my perspective as a non-Christmas collector, of postal history. in Christmas stamps. Then I've got a bunch of intersecting collections, different areas. I've mentioned before that I collect postage dues. This is a lovely letter from a little girl in Ireland to Santa Claus at North Pole in the world. The Irish Post Office wasn't sure how much postage that would take, so they gave it postage due. She asks for a bicycle, a new KNEW coat, and a dolly with a nurse's outfit. And she thanks Santa for his Christmas gifts. So it's a great item for my postage due collection. I have several kids that are sitting at the front of the audience here today. One of them is my friend Crazy Shirley, and she collects, obviously, horses on stamps. So she made up this Christmas first day cover last year. Here the kids are all reading a letter from Santa Claus. Again, it's fun. World War I, as you know, we declared war in April of 1917. The first troops went overseas in July of 1917. And in order to pay for the war, in November of 1917, U.S. postage rates were increased. They went from 2 cents to 3 cents for a first-class letter, and they went from 1 cent to 2 cents for a postcard. So it's only in the December 1917 period that you will find those rates, because they were then reversed during the wartime, because they were then reversed in May of 1919. So you'd find them in December of 18, but the war wasn't going on. And the bottom example is an example of a postcard from a soldier overseas writing back to the United States. In World War I, there was also, right after the end of the war, the Army newspaper Stars and Stripes came up with the idea that every soldier should write a Christmas letter to their dad. And if their dad was not alive, to somebody else's dad. So they alternately called it either a dad's Christmas letter, or sometimes people wrote Father Christmas letter. And in that year, there were approximately 2 million of these letters mailed. This is December of 1918. At that point, there were approximately 2 million American servicemen serving in Europe, so practically everybody wrote one of these letters. World War II, Santa stepped up as well, put on khakis for his uniform, joined in email celebrations all across the world, letters, cards, everywhere else. You'll find many representations. We're just looking at some today. As a sideline, I collect meter stamps, different issues earlier. So the top example is a postcard, Mark Season's greeting. I got it for the rate, but it's a notice of a business Christmas lunch sent out to former employees. The middle example from 1940 is the only two-tone cancel that I've seen. Not that there aren't others, it's just I haven't seen many, but there it is in red and green. And the bottom example is a Liberty Bell stamp used first-class pre-canceled mail, which then was a lower postage rate, announcing a gift subscription to Reader's Digest for somebody for Christmas. So you can find it in all different ways, and as I said, these are all other collections. Telegrams has also been an interesting area, how they're used, how they're taxed. The Western Union Company and the other major competitor, Postal Telegraph, used to issue stationery that was inscribed for the season. So I have birthday, Father's Day, Christmas, Thanksgiving, all different letterheads, what would then be delivered to the recipient. In the case here on the top with the holiday greetings logo and the envelope, you see that the envelope is franked with a 2-cent stamp in 1940. This was to cover the local intra-city postage rate. It used to be that you could send a letter within the city for 2 cents, even though the intercity was 3 cents. In this case, the recipient had moved, and it's very light, but you can see due 1 cent. So since they had moved and the letter had to be forwarded, it had to be paid at the first class intercity rate of 3 cents. So that's why it's in my postage due collection. Tiny mail's always just been fun. You find the little envelopes, the little cards. Here are 3 examples. The top one is a tag. It's franked with 1 cent on the back. And it says, oh, we will be at home. At home used to be the society custom. You would send out a notice of when you would be receiving visitors, at what time and what day, and friends would come by and they'd either drop off their calling card, or if they had previously met you, you would actually make their acquaintance. So that's the top one. The one on the left is a little RPO, cancel, and the one on the right is a Christmas card. Again, sent at the inner city rate of 1 cent, which was also the 3rd class rate, which we'll get into in a minute. So again, the tiny mail is fun. This is another tiny mail one. The Christmas card that was contained in it was a bamboo-like material, a very thin, woody texture card, mailed from the east and carried on board a trans-Pacific steamship that had its own post office. And again, it's hard to see the details, but ultimately it says Trans-Pacific Post number 3, east. So this was a ship coming from the Orient to the Pacific West Coast, and likely from Hong Kong to the United States. Postal history also involves rates, or knowing when things were mailed and how much they should have cost. As you probably all are familiar with the introduction of stamps in 1847 in the United States, they followed the rates that had been created in 1845 of 5 cents for under 500 miles, under 300 miles, 10 cents for over 300 miles. So this is a stampless letter mailed in 1848 from Hamden, Connecticut, canceled on December 25th, paid for 5 cents because it was only going to New York. At that point, Christmas was not a, quote, holiday. Post office worked, everybody worked. If you go back and think, it was in this time period that Charles Dickens was writing A Christmas Carol. And you remember how Mr. Scrooge reacted when his clerk wanted the day off. Just another excuse to rob my pockets. Postage rates varied for different reasons. The usage varied. The top example is a postcard mailed and canceled on a rural delivery route, RFD, Rural Free Delivery. When this service was started, uniting a lot of other people who were not easily able to access a town or a city, the mailman would pick up their mail and deliver their mail, and he would also cancel mail and deliver it along the route. If you were sending it to the next farm 10 miles down the road, it never went into the main post office. He canceled it and delivered it. The example here on the left with the 1 cent stamp is an envelope mailed locally, intra-city, at what was, quote, the Christmas card rate. 3rd class, unsealed, open for inspection, containing no writing. People mail flyers that way. They mail educational information that way. You still see it now sometimes in printed mail matter or media mail. Effectively, that's what this is. But you could also use it for a Christmas card or any kind of card, because all you were doing was taking a printed document, and at the bottom you were saying, love, Richard and Joanne. Okay, the post office said that was fine. The example next to it on the right, somebody tried to do that later on, 1952, at which point the rate was 2 cents. But the post office looked at it and said, uh-oh, they gummed it. They gummed the envelope. They sealed it. It's not open to inspection. Therefore, it's not eligible for 3rd class. So therefore, they had to pay 1st class rates, and it was assessed postage due. And the bottom example is a 1956, 55 rate, where again, they left it unsealed. 2 cents was the correct postage. All of these are for other reasons than the Christmas for my collections. In 1925, the United States government defined a difference between a postal card and a postcard. They said a postal card was that which we, the government, issue and sell. A postcard is one of those glittery, fun, printed things that you buy from the newsstand at the corner. We're going to let our cards go through at 1 penny a card, but we're going to charge you 2 cents for the postcard. And this is what happened. This envelope is 1925. Christmas seal next to it, canceled. They hoped it was going to generate significant amounts of revenue to pay for increases in postal salaries. It didn't, but they increased the postal salaries anyway. 1928, businesses made the case that, well, if we're going to improve our sales and improve coverage of information, we want to send out material to the public. But if I have to pay postage on everything that I send out that somebody can send back, then I'll go bankrupt. So I won't mail things out. So you, the post office, won't get the business. The post office came up with the idea, or actually the businesses came up with the idea of what we now know as business reply mail. You see these little cards inside of magazines. You see them everywhere where the postage is only charged to the recipient if the item is mailed. If it's not mailed, nothing's due. So this is an example from the first year in 1928 where the postcard was mailed, returned to the vendor. The postcard rate was 1 cent. The fee was 1 cent. So that's why it was postage due from the recipient of 2 cents. And again, a Christmas seal. The United States has also set up different sizes. Well, now that we're standardizing equipment and standardizing this and standardizing that, we don't want pieces that are outside of our normal size, quote unquote, because that requires extra handling, so we have to charge you extra postage. The bottom example is a Christmas card that fell outside that range. The detail on the label says mail must be at least 3.5 inches high and 5 inches long. This does not meet that requirement. It was it was shorter than the 3.5 inch height. So they sent it back to the sender and said either pay extra postage or put it in the right size envelope. This top cover is one of my favorites. It is the 1969 pre-canceled Christmas stamp, pre-canceled at New Haven, Connecticut, used at New Haven, Connecticut in December of 1969 to mail an envelope, special delivery, and the stamp itself is not canceled. The special delivery stamp is canceled, but the pre-canceled stamp is not canceled. So it did everything that it was supposed to do. The cover below it is from a similar time period where the regular Christmas stamp was used, the unpre-canceled version, and it was used along with other special delivery stamps mailed December 21. Somebody didn't think timely enough and was late in getting their Christmas greetings out. Here in 1974, somebody mailed a Christmas card, but they forgot to put postage on it, and they forgot to put a return address on it. So the post office opened it up, figured out who sent it, closed it up again with the seals, assessed them the 20 cents postage due for having to open it up and then sending it forward. And on the back, there are 6 or 7 Christmas seals. So again, with the design and everything else, a Christmas card. Other people, other institutions also use mail at Christmas time. And again, this is from my rate for 3rd class, where this company was sending what, based on the size of the envelope, my guess is a pocket calendar. We all get those at Christmas time from every business in our area. My eye doctor continually sends us one. And at that point, the rate was 4 cents, paid by the pre-canceled Lincoln stamp. Card seasoned greetings, but it's an example of 3rd class mail for that time. In the early 2000s, 2010s, whatever you call this decade, the Hallmark Company came up with the idea of we'll sell greeting cards that are prepaid. Of course, they added it into the price, so you aren't getting any real bargain. but you didn't have to put a stamp on this envelope. The barcode on the envelope told the post office that this was a Hallmark card. When Hallmark sold the cards, they paid 50% of the postage to the post office. If you never mailed it, the post office made out ahead. If you did mail it, the post office went back to Hallmark and said, oh, we have some of these cards. And Hallmark paid the other 50% of the postage. So either way, the post office made out. And it was an interesting idea. It didn't last very long. And again, I don't know what the sales were. I've seen very few. Of course, people mail things overseas all the time. And again, from a postage due standpoint, these are my items. The top item was being mailed to Canada, but it didn't have enough postage. For a long time, Canadian and U.S. first-class postage rates were the same, but starting in the 1970s, the Canadian rates started to increase greater than the U.S. rates. So that was sent back to the originator because it was too light in postage. The bottom example was sent to Sweden. Sweden only delivers mail Monday to Friday. If you want mail delivered on the weekend, you have to pay an extra fee. And here in 1982, Christmas was on a Saturday. So in order for this Christmas card to get delivered, for this mail to get delivered, the recipient had to pay an extra fee, indicated by the Swedish stamps and the label there that it was postage due. Canada also has great faith in its customers. In this case, an envelope was due 12 cents, so they sent it along to the originator, and they sent along a card that said, oh, please mail us the 12 cents when you can. And what you'll often see is these cards with a stamp on it indicating that somebody bought a stamp, mailed it back to the post office. As I said, there are a number of things I collect just because I like what's on the stamp. Cinderellas. Everybody's got a few. Some of them are just fascinating, whether they are a stamp-like thing or a nice design. You add them when you find them. Edward VIII. I always was interested in the whole story of Edward VIII. It was fascinating that somebody could be moved by passion that much to give up literally the kingship of the world at that point. England was a major power. Since then, I've learned a lot more, and it seems like it probably was the best decision that could have happened. But in 1936, he submitted his abdication on December 10th. This set from England in 2018 shows mailboxes, and on each mailbox is the monogram of the reigning monarch. So in this case, that's the ER with a crown above it, and actually the VII inside it. But that was the first year in modern times there was no king or queen crowned in England. I have a brother-in-law that's from a small town in upstate Pennsylvania, a place called Elk County. His town is Benezet. In the time that this postcard in the upper side was written, in the 1920s, Benezet had a population of about 200 people. Today, it still has a population of 200 people. Another town in that county is Kersey. Very small population in the 1910s, about 500, it's 1,000 now. In Elk County, it's a beautiful place. There are more elk than there are people. It is a highly lucrative tourist attraction, and in season, a good hunting ground. First day collecting. There was a company called Texas Refinery that did a series for many years of advertising first day covers, all featuring their mascot, Percy Oil Drop. These were used as promotional tools to the salespeople to motivate them, because you would often get your picture on an envelope addressed to you, and you knew this was going out to every salesman in the company. Okay, that's a good recognition tool, a little incentive. So in 1962, obviously, they did it for the Christmas stamp. They did it for the 1964 holly stamps. You can find these for many stamps in that time period. For an unexplained reason, I have a collection on food and wine. We enjoy champagne, we enjoy wine, we enjoy food. It's all good. This is a wonderful sheet in the market, and you can see all sorts of delicious foods, and it just so happens to be a Christmas market. But it's because it's a food stamp that I have. I work in a healthcare organization, and several years ago I had done an internal brochure to emphasize the importance of hand washing. And I illustrated it by stamps showing hands doing things. Among other things, there is a stamp showing people washing their hands. So I have a collection of hands on stamps doing things. This is from Canada, modeling the Albrecht Dürer sculpture of praying hands. And when they issued the stamp, they issued it not only in post office sheets, but they issued in these panes. I don't know what they officially call them. They're not booklets. There's no cover. They were sold this way in a glassine envelope, separate from the post office sheets. And outside of the sheet, they're indistinguishable, except if you get a straight edge corner. With a last name of Martorelli, I've been aware of and proud of my Italian heritage and culture. These two stamps at the top picture the Italian Christmas character of La Befana. Some people call her the witch, some people call her a housekeeper. The brief story is that when the wise men were looking for the newborn Christ, they stopped at her house to ask for directions or information. And she didn't know anything, and they said, well, come join us on our quest. She said, I've got too much housekeeping to do. I've got to sweep. I've got to clean up. She then let the wise men leave and became disappointed and thought, really, I should have gone on that adventure. So after she cleaned up, she set out to look for the baby Jesus. She didn't find him until January 6th, the Feast of the Epiphany. And so the legend goes, that's why in Italy, children get presents on January 6th, not really as much on Christmas as they do on the Epiphany. Most people, I'm sure, are familiar with various movie stamps. I believe it's Thomas Richards, has written extensively about stamps used in movies, envelopes used in movies. I was lucky enough to get this as a gift, one of the items used in the How the Grinch Stole Christmas with Jim Carrey, used in the post office scene of Whoville. And I don't know if that's Whoville, West Virginia, which could be a political comment, or if it's just Whoville, WV. I've also collected revenue stamps over the year. And what you see with this green and blue stamp here is in 1962, the United States government issued a commemorative revenue stamp for the 100th anniversary of the IRS. It originally started to collect taxes to pay for the Civil War in 1862. So in 1962, they issued this commemorative stamp. For all those years, revenue stamps were required on hundreds of types of documents and transactions to collect tax. And here on the left, you have a purchase of a house in December of 1965. And on the right, you have a foreclosure of a house on 1967. So you've got a happy and a sad Christmas at the same time. Other things I collect, Snoopy. Who doesn't like Snoopy? There's a cachet maker by the name of Denise Lazarus, and she does wonderful 3D cachets. In this case, it's Pigpen Snowman. So you've got all the gray dirt rising up around the snowman. I have been a lover of cats and have had cats over the years, and this is a Danish postcard with a Christmas seal picturing a cat. I've been an aficionado of Sherlock Holmes since my short pants days, and in one of the stories called The Blue Carbuncle, a goose in particular fits into the plot, swallowing a stolen gemstone. Toys. Who doesn't love toys? we're all kids. Stamps are another variation on toys. So as I find things, again, Christmas, it happens that they're Christmas seals, but they're toys. I worked for a number of years for Amtrak and have a train collection. Again, this Collins First Day cover with the Christmas house and the snow scene tied into what essentially was Plasticville for anybody that remembers HO trains. I've had teddy bears all my life, still have my first teddy bear. It's a panda bear, and have maintained a collection of bears. So again, it's the design on the cachet more than the stamp itself. And that's Christmas with a non-Christmas collector.
Very good.
Thank you. Any questions?
How did you ever come from Penn? Where are you from?
Philadelphia area.
Philadelphia.
I was invited. I had published articles elsewhere that Christine Sanders saw, and then Christine shared that with Marianne, and Marianne contacted me, and so here my wife and I are for the weekend, and then we're going to Chicago for a few days. It's our vacation time.
Okay. Very good, very good.